Welcome back to Leadership Reimagined, where we're redefining leadership for the modern world. I'm your host, Cassie Crosby, and this week we're exploring how to build genuine connection and belonging. To do that, I'm excited to welcome the co-founder of In Good Company, a firm that uses storytelling and design to transform how communities create real connection. We all have something to learn from Kent's approach about modern leadership. So whether you're building teams or strengthening communities, in this conversation, you'll discover practical ways to create deeper connections and foster belonging. So Kent, I'm so excited to welcome you to the show, and welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and to just participate. And I thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I would love to start with talking a little bit about your journey, what brought you to In Good Company and the work you do today.
Yes. Okay. To introduce myself, my name is Kent Harris, and I am a community designer. I am a cultural worker, a documentarian of sorts, and an artist. And I'm currently based in Columbus, Ohio, and work between here and Brooklyn, New York. What brought me to Ended Company was actually I lived in New York for a few years and was working at a studio where I met my colleague, Vinay Kumar Mysore. At the end of our time at the studio, we got together and they were like, I want to start a studio with you. And I was just really humbled by the fact that they thought that we would just have a great partnership together. And what made us really excited about it is that we loved the work that we were doing, but we wanted to introduce our own values to the work and to impact a different space. We were working in the built environment. And usually, the kind of work that we do, community engagement, for lack of a better word, and we can talk more about what community engagement looks like, but it's usually something that is an afterthought or might be brought in as part of the process where it doesn't really have a lot of impact. And we wanted to approach our work from a different standpoint where we could really partner with communities in a way that allowed their voices to be heard first and foremost.
Yeah. How did you know that was needed?
Honestly, if I zoom way further back, I was always someone who was really interested in human-centered design. So my background is actually more in digital design, or you might be familiar with user experience design. And I was always interested in how do we make design resonate with human beings in a more accessible way. And so I started researching that, I want to say 7 to 8 years ago, but I never really found a place that valued it in a way that you were really interacting with human beings until I got to Open Box, which was the former studio that I was working at. And so I got to the place where I was like, wow, you get to really see we were going to the places where, the projects that we were working on were happening, whether that was San Diego, California, or Portland, Maine. And right now I'm working on a project in Newark, New Jersey through In Good Company. And being able to immerse yourself into a place and being able to witness and observe how people are living, what their struggles are, what their joys are, and really help uncover what their needs are, you start to recognize people know what their problems are, which means they know what the solution to their problems are. And it's really our job to help them, to help facilitate arriving to that solution. And that's what our design process looks like.
Wow. Yeah, I think there's something so important today about that interaction with actual humans. We've become so disconnected from it in some ways.
Yeah.
And I know we'll get more into that in this conversation. I'm
Mhm.
really curious about when you hear the word innovation, what that means to you and how you're thinking about it
Yeah.
in the work you do.
So I think that from a business perspective, I think a lot of businesses think about innovation from the standpoint of things like branding or technology or product. But a few things that I'm a lot more interested in are emotion and sensitivity and vulnerability. And usually those are things that people don't really want to talk about. And I completely understand why, but I'm really curious about what happens when we bring our whole selves to our work. And so for me, I think that innovation starts on the inside, and self understanding helps us navigate the world around us, whether that is the people that we love or the places that we're in or the communities that we're a part of. And so I'm not suggesting that knowing yourself is easy work.
Mm,
And I don't really think it's work that ever ends. But one of the things that I've learned over the years is if I have 20 things on the table, I have to really prioritize myself as one of the most important things because if I get me right, then I have a lot more capacity for everything else. And so personally, knowing myself has a lot to do with remembering whose I am. And that has everything to do with my relationship with God. And that guides everything that I do. And so I would encourage people, I would say, seek deeper understanding, whether that's within yourself, within your communities, or your environment. Because I think what people will discover is that opportunity for innovation exists everywhere. Otherwise, if it's not rooted in something real, I think that it risks ending up feeling pretty shallow.
yeah, and how interesting that the work to help other people feel more like they belong starts with understanding yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is something I've been practicing in particular over the past, I want to say, year and a half. I lost my job at the end of last year, towards the end of last year. And from a societal perspective, we associate our identity with things that we accomplish or
Yeah.
the groups that we're part of or achieving a certain financial success.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was stripped away from me. And I struggled with that for months. And it forced me to reflect and to internalize, like, where am I sourcing my success? Where am I sourcing my self-esteem and self-confidence? And I had to recognize it's not in achieving all of these things. It's not in achieving status. It's not in achieving money. It's not in people you associate yourself with. It's all inside. And I think that's one of those things when you're younger, you're like seeking it everywhere else. You're seeking it outside of you. And I'm so grateful that I had the time. I turned my unemployment into an opportunity. And it wasn't the first time I had ever been let go from a company, but each time I think I found something within myself that I could bring into the next thing.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and I deal with that a lot in the work I do as well. I talk to people about leadership and I really think it does start with that self-leadership and to your point, honoring yourself and what you need so that you can show up better for other people.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about some of the things that distract us from that. But first, I want to go into a little bit more about your process. When I first met you and learned more about your company, your process, there's just something so interesting and I think so valuable for leaders in how you approach the work. So, can you talk a little bit about that before we go into deeper into what some of the challenges you're dealing with day to day are?
Yeah. So our process is very place-based. We don't start a project really without understanding the place that our project is affecting. And so there's a lot of work done to understand that, whether that is talking to people that live there, doing our own research, standard research online or through articles and books. Um, but we really want to ground ourselves in an understanding of the politics of a place, the economics of a place, and the personality of a place, really. And then we use that to guide who we speak to. So then it's okay, now we know a little bit about the place. Let's learn about the people. And for example, I'll speak on an older project because I think it could be helpful. So in San Diego, we were working on a project at Balboa Park where we wanted to create a visitor experience plan that was inclusive of the communities that lived there. And what they found was like the people weren't actually immersing themselves into the place and they were trying to understand why. So we went there and we stayed for a few weeks. And I think that's one of the best parts is like when you get to go to a place and feel like you are not really native, but an understanding in a way that you're not a tourist.
Yep.
And we have one-on-one interviews with people where we go to where they are. We go to their most comfortable location, a place that's familiar to them, and we talk to them. It's like a normal conversation, but one of the things that we do is we create activities to help make the conversation more enjoyable, more fun, maybe allow us to get deeper insights. And then we use those insights to guide our recommendations. And so those recommendations could be anywhere from maybe this statue shouldn't be here anymore because it doesn't reflect the communities that are part of this place. Or maybe we could have more like nature in this area that allows more respite for people. But it's really grounded in actual human insights instead of thinking we know the answer to something. But I would say one of the differences in our work right now is that we dropped off at the recommendation point in our projects previously. And I'm super excited about the work that we're doing right now with In Good Company because we're actually completing these projects through execution. So right now we're working on a community doula exhibit in northern New Jersey.
Yeah.
And that's really dope to me because it's not just an exhibit, it is a tool for advocacy, it's a pathway for policy, and it's also an opportunity to increase funding for the work that doulas do. And so I think it's really cool to see this experience or these art forms and say, hey, I'm inspired by this enough to do something about it. And I look forward to doing more projects like this where we can use creative approaches to change making to inspire people to act.
Yeah, your story about Balboa Park almost feels like a parable for workplaces today. Like, how do we get people more engaged to show up, to be there? So I'm
Mhm.
curious if there's something that you learned in that work you did that maybe could help other leaders and how they're thinking about, if I want people more engaged, how do I approach that? Where do I start?
Yeah. I think one of the things, and I'd use another project for an example. We were working on an expansion project for the Portland Museum of Art in May.
Mhm.
And with that project, one of the things that we found really helpful, and I would say this applies to pretty much any project or any art space. I've been thinking about this a lot in the context of art spaces, is um, taking the art to the people, taking the experience to the people. I think particularly because if a group is not familiar with the place because they chose not to participate, I don't think expanding it is necessarily going to make people come.
Mhm.
I think that has a lot to do with programming. I think that has a lot to do with a desire to reach people where they're at and bring them in. And so I would suggest that is a powerful opportunity for people to recognize where there are gaps in their audiences and identifying where those audiences are. And instead of asking them to come to you, maybe go to them instead.
Yeah. Wow. It's so impactful, not just the that you're impacting people, policies, places, but also I think there's something so fundamental in people feeling heard. If there's
Mhm.
like a challenge there or a reason that they're not showing up in certain places, that you're
Yeah,
giving them that opportunity to
for
feel
sure.
heard. Yeah.
And it's always heartwarming to see that people, they're like, wow, like people actually care about what I think.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I'm like, yeah, of course. I'm just that type of person anyway, where I'm like, I want to hear what you think about this thing. But not only to hear it, but to see it in action, I think is a whole new level of validation.
Yeah. Amazing. So, what is something that is keeping you up at night and what do you do about it?
So this is in the line of the work that I do, but I think lately one of the things that's been keeping me up at night is the urgency and the importance of really being intentional about story preservation. because
Mhm.
all of us were on these really unique journeys. We have memories, we have feelings and moments that really matter to us. But because of our demanding lifestyles, I think that a lot of those stories end up getting lost. And so not only do I think about me or myself, I think about my loved ones. And sometimes I get really sad thinking about the fact that there are stories that could have been kept, that might have been lost, that could have been preserved if we just were more intentional about making the time for that.
Mhm.
And this hit home for me, I would say, with the loss of my grandmothers. I
Mhm.
lost one in 2016. Her name was Alice. And then I lost another earlier this year, and her name was Doris. And at that funeral, for that funeral, I was responsible for creating the memorial presentation. So obviously I got hundreds of photos. She was like 96 years old, so she
Wow.
lived a long life. And there was one photo that stood out to me. And that photo, she was standing by herself. She had a pixie haircut. And I say that because I've always associated pixies with a sense of self. Like I know
Mhm.
who I am. And she had this really cute black dress. And when I look at that picture, it was the first time I ever had seen that picture. And when I look at it, it reminds me that she had lived so many lives before we ever met. And
Yeah.
that hit me really hard. And I was like, where are all these stories at? Like, where do I go to find those? But today I know that I'm really lucky that I can have her favorite cup of tea or her favorite meal or listen to her favorite songs to feel close to her. But I find myself yearning for much more than that. And it's not just about me or my story, but I think it's about all of us and especially marginalized communities where our stories are usually pushed to the side.
Yeah.
So it makes me think about it from a societal perspective as well. This includes stories of exclusion, stories of gentrification,
Mhm.
stories of economic struggle, and even personal transition because we all go through things that change us and impact our trajectory forward. And those stories sometimes get lost because we're just moving. But yeah, I think that whether our stories are joyful or painful or somewhere in between that, they shouldn't get lost because all of these stories deserve to be felt and heard and remembered. But I don't know. I'm really excited about the fact that I have these skills and these passions to be able to do something about it, to be able to document, to be able to design, and to be able to bring people together to create the spaces or the homes for these stories to live forever.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's something so meaningful about even hearing those stories in terms of how to make sense for yourself in this world. And
Mhm.
you're right, so much of it is lost, and as we get older and lose earlier generations, so much more of it gets lost. So it's incredible that so much of the work you do is capturing some of those stories for people
Yeah.
in some kind of art form, which is just really cool.
Thank you. And I think one of the things that really sat with me while doing the work, you can imagine we end up with so many photos, with
Yeah.
so much audio, with so much story. And most of it is really only used to affect like a project. And I think about there's so much more we can do with this. And I'm like, how can we extend the life of these stories in another way? And I'm excited about exploring that some more in our work too, because we could create a book. We could create a website dedicated to the expansive storytelling of this project.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a bit of a sidebar. There was a company I came into contact with about a year ago who was
Mhm.
working to help people recreate stories of people who passed through using artificial intelligence and using pictures and stories, and then having that person who passed on actually tell those stories themselves
That's really cool.
using imagery and voice, yeah, voice, what do you call it? Like where they're copying the voice of
I
the
know what you're
person.
talking about. I
Yeah.
don't know what it's called, but that's such a
Creation.
unique way to approach storytelling and story
Yeah.
preservation that I like hadn't even crossed my mind yet. So like I would
Yeah.
love to learn more about that project.
Yeah, it's something you guys should definitely look into. And in my head, I'm even picturing a hologram of someone speaking in a community who
Mhm.
right, no longer is there to speak for themselves.
Yeah.
has their story captured.
That's really dope. And I think that storytelling will probably head in that direction given how advanced technology is becoming, given
Yeah.
how accessible artificial intelligence seems to be these days.
Yeah.
So it's going to be cool, like within an ethical realm, to see
Yeah.
how people like start to creatively use it.
Yeah, that's the challenge always is how do we apply
Yeah.
it ethically? So with that, where are you seeing opportunities either in your
Mhm.
industry or in your community?
I think that opportunities in storytelling and archival work, like when I think about it, I get a little bit overwhelmed, but in the best way possible, just because there are so many stories that are waiting to be told or waiting to be heard. But right now, with the company, I think I'm seeing opportunities everywhere. I think, particularly, I'm excited about the opportunities to give voice to marginalized communities.
Mhm.
One of the things that I've been thinking about regarding this work is, I don't know, this phrase came to mind the other day, but it was changing minds by changing feelings. I think facts and figures we know are very powerful, but they're not always the thing that drive people to
Yeah.
act on things. And so what Benai and I have discovered is that what moves people is actually feeling something. So when I think about opportunities for us, we can look in the smallest places and say, hey, how can I make someone feel that? It's in every untold story. I think it's in every community who hasn't had the opportunity to really own their own narratives. For us, I think the key is creating spaces where stories can be felt, not just heard. Yeah, I think in particular, when it comes to the community doula project, it's not just that we need new policies, it's that we need new ways of helping people understand why those policies matter. And so if they don't get that, it's not who cares about the policy. When people understand things, when people feel things, then they're like, oh, I get it. Let me actually use my autonomy to do something about that. And so, yeah, I think that comes with storytelling. I think it comes with feeling, and I think it comes with facilitating real human connection.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think we're seeing an even more urgent need for that today as the world
Mhm.
continues to change, our society continues to change. And I think bringing people's voices to the forefront and allowing people to see the individual experiences of humans, particularly those marginalized communities, because I do think that despite the fact that we're more connected than ever, I think emotionally we're more disconnected and people are feeling that loneliness, that disconnection from others. I think there's a ton of potential in the work you're doing to help people understand and see other people's experiences and realize that we are all humans. We
Yeah.
all want the same things.
Yeah, I think that loneliness epidemic is so real, and I
Yeah.
think I think that we might see it. This is not my prediction. I think I've just been like reading about it and hearing about it, how cycles go, and we've had this hyper like pseudo connectivity
Yeah.
through the internet. And I think that we are likely headed in a direction where people want to have more in person experiences that resonate with their feelings, with their emotions. Like they might want to explore different parts of themselves that they don't necessarily have access to online. And I
Mhm.
think creating these spaces is going to be necessary for that to be able to happen.
Yeah, yeah, and to allow people to show up in person to make these
Yeah.
connections.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and also to make sure that people feel like they belong,
yeah,
because we talk a lot about inclusivity, but what does it matter if I feel included if I don't feel like I belong? And
yeah,
so I think it's really important for us to lean further into creating spaces of belonging. Otherwise, I can show up and still not participate.
yeah. What do you think the distinction is between inclusion and belonging? I've heard some different theories on it,
Yeah,
but how do you think of it differently?
that's so deep, Cassie. What is the difference? I think this. takes me back to, I think it was like 2017 or 2018, where I was first really confronted with this. My introduction to just being passionate about art spaces actually came from participating in the Shoemake Council at the Columbus Wexner Center for the Arts.
Mm.
And I want to shout out Dion Custer Edwards for really just seeing in me something that could have impact in this area, even though I had little to no experience in the arts. I'm just like, wow. But while I was on that council, it was a Black advisory council with Black art enthusiasts and artists that advised certain decision making. And there was an exhibit for Micheline Thomas, and she's an amazing artist who at the time I didn't know about. And they had brought us in to have a conversation because her art is really doing a lot of storytelling for Black women and the experiences of Black women. And they wanted to create a space that made Black women felt like this was their exhibit. And for me, belonging shows up in a way where I started to think about it as like mirrors.
Mm.
Do I see myself in this space? If I walk into this space, am I the only person there that looks like me, that thinks like me, that feels like me? So it's not just about what's on the wall. It's about who are the people that I can go to in this place that can resonate with me, that can make me feel comfortable. Being intentional, not just about bringing in artists that reflect my experience, but making sure the organization is staffed in a way where I feel like I can trust your stewardship of these stories, bringing in community members, not even people who have achieved a level of status that feels like, oh yeah, I would expect you to bring them here. But I think it's even about bringing in community to activate spaces in new ways.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I've heard it put, and I think I'm hearing this in what you're saying too, is like belonging is how we feel when we are in that space about
Mhm.
ourselves and our kind of place there. And inclusion is how we help others feel that sense of
Yeah.
belonging, right? What is the environment that we create for others?
Yeah. And I think inclusion can feel like a costume if
Mhm.
it if
Mhm.
it's not digging deeper than anything than that.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Performative
Mhm.
inclusion. Yeah, and I think a lot of people get confused too with like diversity metrics, like plain numbers versus actually, is this space inclusive? Do we
Yeah.
hear all voices? Are we representative here, et cetera?
Mhm.
Yeah. So, my last question for you is, what's one thing that you wish you had known coming into this space and this work that you
Mhm.
do that you now know?
Hmm. I don't know if it's specific to the space,
That's
but I think it's specific to life that helps me navigate the space better. Yeah, I think it helps me navigate like career and success better. And a few years ago, I had actually tweeted something along the lines of, I'm going to stop looking at making it as a singular event in my life because it's not. I've made it before and I'm going to keep on making it. And when I tweeted that, I don't know what I was going through to make me, like, I was younger than I am now. I'm like, what were you
Yeah.
going through? But it means so much more to me now than it did because I think about these different ways of looking at life. Some people look at life as a race with one finish line. And
Mhm.
I like the way of looking at life as a garden with new fruits and new flowers that grow every season because I think, there's going to be pests, there's going to be weeds, there's going to be rainy days, but I think it's the rainy days that help us really grow. And so thinking of it that way, I think young me would have put a lot less pressure on myself to achieve someone else's perception of what success is.
Mm,
And yeah, I think that understanding life in this way has not only made me more grateful, but I think it's made me more hopeful and more ambitious and more excited about like opportunities ahead of me because I don't think even what me and Vinay are doing right now, like this is just the beginning and there's so much more to be had. So
yeah.
yeah, I can celebrate where I am right now while still having dreams and excitement about where I'm going.
Yeah, I love that, and that analogy just really resonates because I love gardening. And it makes me think too, like, how much work is required each season to right, to make sure all that happens, and then also the phases that come with a garden, rapid growth, and then the ending of a season, you know?
Yeah, I've never been the person with the green thumb. I think that's my brother, but I actually have been really interested. It was towards the end of my stay in New York when I would go on walks. And I was that person that was going on walks where I was getting like 15,000 steps a day. But I was walking past so many community gardens.
Mm,
And towards the end of me being there, I was like, man, why didn't I get involved more in these gardens? And so now that I'm back in Columbus, I have this deep interest to explore gardening
yeah,
in a way and also the impact that it has on facilitating community and community health and wealth and all of
mm,
those things. Because I don't see a lot of community gardens out here, even though there's a lot more green. It's like the function of them feels a little bit different.
mm.
But yeah, I like that you mentioned gardening. I would love to learn more from you about it.
Yeah, the next time you come to Maine, we have to stop by the
Absolutely.
garden.
Absolutely.
And we do have a few community gardens around here. I find that in places, right, like Columbus, I imagine has a couple when you have really populated places and people don't have yards, it's a place for them to go.
Yeah. And they're
That's
getting creative with them in New
they
York.
are.
Like they're on rooftops. It's like
I
vertical
know.
gardening and everything.
Yeah, it's very cool. This has been an awesome conversation. I appreciate your insights so much. You are doing such incredible work. I hope that's
Thank
apparent
you.
to everyone listening, just how deeply you're thinking about this stuff and how meaningful it is. I'm curious if you can share where can people find you? Where can we follow you if they're interested
Yeah.
in keeping up with what you're doing?
For sure. So our website is We Are Good, and we are also in the works of creating our newsletter and Instagram. And our Instagram is also our website name, so wearegood.co.
Nice.
And I'm on LinkedIn. I am not on my personal Instagram as much, but my personal Instagram is Kent underscore H, very short and sweet.
Nice. Okay, cool. Thank you again. And this has been great. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Cassie.